good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 in the morning on a Thursday morning. I am recording. I'm going to spritz these watercolors so that they're nice and juicy here in a few minutes when we're ready to use them. I want to make sure that I can just dab into them and not have to flick and rub them with the water brush. I want to make sure they're moist. I don't know why people are offended by that word, moist. This is the time of day that we pull a toy out of the toy box we call the Random Object Randomogrifier. Today's random object is a pirate with a hook, a shovel, and a monkey. And I'm bleeding. Oh, no, it's paint. When I pulled the pirate out of the box, I was like, man, didn't I just talk about pirates? I thought, man, I should probably throw him back because I just talked about pirates. And then I thought, you know what? How many pirates actually had hooks in their hands? And so I thought I'd do a little research and talk about prosthetics and how popular they actually were. And were they popular at all? Yeah, see, this is the reason the composition phase is so important. We've made that too big already. But I went down a rabbit hole last night studying prosthetics and where they've been, where they're going, and now you get to hear about it. Which is, I'm guessing, what you're down for because you're here every day. I hope you're here every day. But this little guy is part of the Pirates collection, and it's from Safari. I'm not paid by Safari, but Safari, if you're listening, call me. But he's part of the pirate collection. Almost Treasure Island. They followed all the tropes from Treasure Island, but the trope of pirates having hooked legs started with there's a book called The General History of Pirates, where a very famous governor was taken hostage by a group of pirates, and the pirates were going to kill him. And he was a sailor and had a lot of friends that were also sailors, and one of his friends turned out to be one of the pirates who stepped forward to save him, and that pirate had a peg leg. But there's no record of a pirate having a peg leg. It's we're not sure if it was true. It doesn't matter. It was a good story at the time, and it's still a good story. As many of the history books written during the day are the same way. It's accuracy, historical accuracy is not really the point. But that book likely inspired Treasure Island. The Long John Silver in Treasure Island having a peg leg. According to the sources that I studied up on last night, according to the documentary on prosthetics that I watched on YouTube last night that made me an expert overnight, right? I like the story. But Long John Silver didn't have a peg leg. They gave him a peg leg in all of the later adaptations. All the cartoons and everything they gave him a peg leg. In the book he uses a crutch. This is why the composition phase was so important. It's what helps get all of these things all of these details that I'm putting in now have anchor points. And you want to make sure that the anchor points, that if the composition phase was right, then when you go to put the details in, the anchor points will be there for you to make sure that you get some level of accuracy. And if accuracy is important to you, then the composition phase is the key. Sometimes accuracy is important to me, and sometimes I just want the idea. Like essence of people. I used to call it essence of people. I didn't really want to draw people. I just wanted to draw the essence of people. I don't think I read Treasure Island. I think I've only ever seen bits and pieces of the movie and the cartoons. So maybe I should spend some time reading Treasure Island. But I don't remember if Long John Silver had a peg leg in the book or not. But that aside, a hook hand, as portrayed here, would have been very expensive for a pirate. First off, you would have had to have had a surgeon to save the limb and get you so to wear a hook on to begin with. And most, especially pirate ships, most merchant ships did not have a surgeon on board. What they had was a ship's carpenter. Pirate ships, not merchant ships, pirate ships. Most pirate ships did not have a surgeon on board. They had a ship's carpenter, and the ship's carpenter would be tasked with the removal of limbs. And while they were very adept at taking limbs off, they weren't very adept at preserving the wound to make it not get infected, to make it useful to hold onto a hook. They weren't very good at that part of it. There is one account in particular where they used the ship's carpenter, and he comes down with his saw and very quickly gets the man's leg off, but then cauterizes the wound with a fiery club and burns the guy further up the leg so much that that portion of his leg becomes infected, and they have to come back later and cut more of his leg off. That doesn't sound like fun to me. As a pirate, that's something I would want to avoid. But on the note of prosthetics, hooked hands were around at the time. Hooked hands are still around. You can still meet people with hooked hands. My grandfather had a really good friend, Ames, that had a hooked hand. I've met And you always want to make pirate comments to them, but I think that's considered rude. I'm not sure how they feel about it. If they care at all, they may make the same jokes. Arr. You often wonder if in the morning they're like, "Arr, hand me my eggs, woman." But I don't know. I don't know. Do 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 do. One of the things I found interesting in my rabbit hole search last night was in the use of prosthetics. The first prosthetic found was not a leg or a hand or anything like that. The oldest prosthetic we have actually found is a toe. It's a big toe from about 3,000 years ago in Egypt. It was the daughter of a princess. It was the daughter of a priest, and apparently, sandal wearing is a huge part of the Egyptian culture, and you can't wear a sandal if you don't have your toes. And so, she had a big toe made of wood, brass, and leather, and it had a hinge in the toe area, right at the knuckle of the toe, so that her sandal, so that it could be bent so that her sandal would operate. And it's not a one-time thing. They found another one from about 600 years later that was more like paper mache, and it wasn't nearly as functional. So the person who had it was not nearly as not nearly as rich. It was more like just the shape, no hinge, no leather laces, just a paper mache toe. That was 600 years later, so that would have been 2,500 years ago. And those weren't so much for vanity as they were just so they could wear their shoes. You know, but that's a little bit of vanity involved. They say that up to 20% of amputees that have some sort of prosthetic won't wear it because it's not comfortable, because it's heavy. And the only time they will wear it is for whatever specific task they were doing with it. Uh-oh, I forgot to fill my water brush, but I have a way around that. Sorry, I just had to use my spritzer to fill my water brush. Anyway, where were we? So while there's a certain amount of vanity with wearing a prosthetic, I must have a prosthetic. I must look like a whole person. You know, there were knights that would lose their hands in battle. there were Roman generals. And this brings up the question of whether or not your prosthetic is for restoration or enhancement. Are you wearing your prosthetic because you want to have the use of your hand back, or are you wearing a prosthetic because you want to be built back better? Are you Steve Austin? Or are you this young fella here missing his arm? Nobody under 40 knows who Steve Austin is. I'm not sure people under 50. I'm not sure everybody under 50 knows who Steve Austin is. He's a $6 million man, of course. He was an astronaut in a television series in the 70s. The ship blew up, and they made him into the Bionic Man. They gave him they gave him robotic arms and legs and an eyeball, just the one. Just the one eyeball. So he had superhuman strength and vision, speed. He could run faster than cars could drive away. And while we laugh about that today, I mean, it's an interesting concept. Cyborgs. We have a few cyborg superheroes where they're mostly machines. In the comic books, rather. But then you look at the Olympics. The star was Lee Majors' mom. My mom's in the chat. I remember that show. Mom, you're over 40. Yeah, the star was Lee Majors. But I'll tell you what was funny, when I was trying to think of the name Steve Austin, I couldn't come up with Steve Austin. All I could come up was Colt Seavers. My mother's just barely over 40. But I couldn't come up with Steve Austin from memory. I had to actually stop and do a quick search. Because all I could think was Colt Seavers. And Colt Seavers was Lee Majors' next role, the Fall Guy, which, as far as I understand, there are no robotics or cybernetics or prosthetics of any kind. But another one of the interesting things I found out was the rise of gunpowder increased the rise in prosthetics because two things. One, hands and limbs were blown off more frequently. And two, the doctors at the time thought that gunpowder was a poison and that you had to get it out of your system before it poisoned your blood, like gangrene. And so the doctors at the time would, if an arm was injured with a gunshot wound or a cannonball, the doctors would just amputate. They would just jump in and amputate. And part of that was because they believed that the gunpowder was poisonous, and part of that was because being able to amputate an arm was being able to amputate something quickly was a thing of fame for them. They would have portfolios that showed how many prosthetics, how many amputations they had done, to demonstrate how good of a surgeon they were. So much so that one of the codes, when they were writing the medical codes, they would put in phrases like being able to amputate a limb quickly and painlessly is a sign of a good doctor, but a sign of a better doctor is one who can preserve the limb. Yeah, that was another thing. My mom's in the chat talking about the prosthetics that the athletes are wearing. Let me dry this real quick. I gotta get a move on. It's already 5:51. Let me dry this real quick. I don't need that dry all the way. I just need to dry it enough so that when I add this splash of color to it, it doesn't reactivate the paint underneath. I do need it drier than that though. All right, so there's that. A little bit of brown. We're in britches. But yeah, prosthetics have come a long ways. What was funny is not funny, haha, funny as in curious. In the 1800s, somebody figured out how to add a locking hinge to a prosthetic knee, and you could unlock it to sit down, or you could unlock your elbow to sit down, and then you could lock it back to stand up. And somebody figured out how to do that in the 1800s, and that same technology is still being used today, which tells you that while there have been many advancements in prosthetics, they're not as advanced as they could be. But yes, when we were talking about cyborgs a while ago, that was one of the things I wanted to bring up, was that you've got athletes at the Olympics with prosthetic legs, and they got these long, springy foots that help them run at normal speeds. And I don't approve. I don't agree. I know this is a level of blasphemy, but when you consider that prosthetic leg does not weigh as much as an actual leg, and that heel does not get tired, that leg does not get tired, just doesn't suffer the fatigue that an actual leg or foot would suffer from. it doesn't really seem all that fair to me to let them compete in the General Olympics. There can be a whole segment of them in the Special Olympics, but it doesn't really seem fair to let them compete in the General Olympics, because the rest of the competitors are not allowed to use any form of enhancement. But it is a long way from a hook hand, for sure. Hang on a second. Ooh, there's just nothing as sexy as watching paint dry. So back to the replacement versus enhancement discussion, though. 1,000 years ago, there was a Roman general that lost his hand in battle, and he had his hand replaced with an iron hand that could hold a shield, because without an iron hand, without being able to hold a shield, he would have to have retired. But he generaled on for many, many more years with his iron hand. So it was useful in that manner. And then fast forward a few centuries, and you have Knight's knights doing the same thing, replacing their lost appendages, especially hands, with iron hands so that they can hold on to the reins of their horse. Which is more of a replacement than an enhancement, but it also was an enhancement because their hands don't get tired. That shield is always there. It's not going to falter due to fatigue. You're not going to let go of the reins because you're tired. Matter of fact, you could be dead and not fall off your horse because your hand is still attached. Most peasants did not use prosthetics because they were too expensive. Most peasants would just have crutches until the 1860s, when a doctor figured out how to make limbs cheaply for all of the returning Union soldiers. And he actually opened a factory. Higgins? I'm drawing a blank right now. I didn't write that one down. He actually opened a factory to do so, I need to color this in to separate it from the shovel and everything. And his company that he started in the 1860s is still around making prosthetics today. But they figured out how to make them cheaper and lighter and more available to the public. So more of the poor folk had them. And the advancements have come so far that now they make hands that move. They're working to figure out how to make them be activated by the mind. They can hook them up to the muscles. They can hook to the existing muscles and nerves for you to move just thinking about them. They're looking at ways to put implants into your brain to allow you to move the prosthetic, which has caused a large group of people who call themselves transhumans to seek out surgery around the world to have limbs removed so they can have these prosthetics because they want to be enhanced. But more importantly to me, there's a group that has figured out how to 3D print prosthetic hands with movable fingers and movable joints, and they 3D print them and give them to children, amputees. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So there is today's sketch. I hope you have enjoyed the discussion today. If so, give us a like there. Give us a little like. Let me show you what this looks like from my perspective. Let's go ahead and turn this mic off because I always have to hook it back up to be able to see if it's turned off or not. All right. Sorry, and a little bit of the technical. Dun, dun, dun. I think those figure drawing classes have really paid off because that's what it looked like from my perspective. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to this every day. Let's look real quick here and see what Girl 2 has pulled a toy out of the toy box, a random object out of the Random Object Randomogrifier. And tomorrow will be a Styracosaurus. Dun dun dun. If you don't know what Styracosaurus is, it's like a Triceratops, but no horn and with the funky frills. So we've got a Styracosaurus, and this Styracosaurus comes with an extra prize. I'm not sure we're going to include it. It is a naked lady. Don't know how she got in there. She is super tiny. You won't see any details. She is super tiny. And I thought at first that she might be relatively close in accuracy to the size of the Styracosaurus. And, you know, maybe she is. But Styracosaurus, maybe. I don't know. We're going to have to give that some thought because she is super tiny. That's what we've got going on for tomorrow. So be sure and join me then. Same artistic biker time, same artistic biker channel. And then we dance. We dance until someone reminds me to put my mic up. That way we know the lag has caught up to the stream and we know that we won't. I didn't turn the music on. I'm dancing with no music. Goodness. Anyway, we can make sure that the lag is caught up with the